Okay, welcome to the third video on the spinal cord, and I'll start with the spinal pia. The pia is the innermost layer, of the spinal meninge, and it is thin. The dura and the arachnoid, they are more thicker than the pia. The pia is very thin, is the delicate membrane that closely covers the surface of the spinal cord. It is the one that is very close to the spinal cord. The other layers, look at this picture here. The dura is the outermost. The arachnoid is the next one. Look at the dura here. The dura, arachnoid. The pia is the innermost. Look at the first layer here, the second layer here, and the third layer is the innermost one, the one that's close to it. This is the spinal cord here. Look at the pia. It's the one that closely encloses and invests the spinal cord. So it is the most innermost layer, of the spinal meninge. It is made up of fine layer of fibroreticular tissue that extends over the perforating vessels, forming a perivascular sheath. I will not go in depth into this layer. We just know that the layer, it extends into 4 areas. The pia mater, the spinal pia, or the pia spinal meninges, it extends into 4 areas. It extends into the phylum terminale. It extends into the phylum terminale. It extends to the linear splendens. It extends to the subarachnoid septum and extends into the ligamentum denticulatum. Those are the 4 areas that the pia extends into. So the phylum terminale, the linear splendens, the subarachnoid septum, and the ligamentum denticulatum. So you can pause the video here if you want to write and read more about the phylum terminale, the linear splendens, the subarachnoid septum, ligamentum denticulatum. Okay, so continue from there. So this picture here is showing the layer dura mater, the arachnoid I've explained before, the pia mater. Also looking at it, you can find the subarachnoid septum. Look at it up here. Subarachnoid septum here, this one, the subarachnoid septum. This is the ligamentum denticulatum, the linear splendens. Yes, it's also there. You can find it also. Look at them extending. The ones underlined with red line. The subarachnoid septum, the ligamentum denticulatum, the linear splendens. So these are the 4 areas that the pia extends into. Now, it also extends over the rootlet of the spinal nerves and merges with the perineum of the spinal nerve trunk. So apart from that, the pia also extends over the rootlet of the spinal nerve and merges with the perineum of the spinal nerve trunk. Now we are moving on to the external features of the spinal cord. We are done with the meninges, the pia, the dura, and the arachnoid. So taking it from outside to inside, the dura, arachnoid, then the pia. Now the external features of the spinal cord. The spinal cord is cylindrical. Yes, it's cylindrical. I already mentioned that already. The cylindrical spinal cord is slightly flattened from front to back. Ventrally, it possesses a deep midline groove called the anterior median fissure. I'll use this diagram to explain it. This is the anterior median fissure. Look at this groove here. Yes, the groove here is the anterior median fissure. Now, the pia is thickened at the mouth of this fissure, forming a longitudinal band known as the linear splendens. Now, the pia encloses the spinal cord intimately. This fissure here is called the anterior median fissure. It's a groove here. And this around this groove region, there's a thickening of pia mater there. And that thickening of pia mater, it forms a band, longitudinal band that's known as the linear splendens. Now, dorsally at the back, there's also a shallow space, a shallow groove there. But that groove is called the posterior median sulcus, from which the posterior median septum of neuroglia extend into its substance. Now, at this posterior part, yeah, you see the posterior median sulcus, and septum. So anteriorly, we have anterior median fissure. Posteriorly, that is at the dorsal part, we have the posterior median sulcus, from which the posterior median septum of the neuroglia extend into its substance. On its sides, we have the anterolateral sulcus and the posterolateral sulcus. Anterolateral sulcus and posterolateral sulcus. So on the sides of the spinal cord, on the sides of the spinal cord, where we have the spinal nerve roots emerging from. If you look at this picture here, the spinal nerve roots emerging from here, anterior sulcus, anterolateral sulcus, and that's the ventral root. The ventral root is coming from there, while the dorsal root is coming from the posterolateral sulcus. Dorsal root from posterolateral sulcus, and the ventral root coming from the anterolateral sulcus. Keep that in mind. The ventral root originates from the anterolateral sulcus and dorsal root from the posterolateral sulcus. A shallow posterior medial sulcus lies between the posterolateral sulcus and the posteromedian sulcus. Now, in between these two, this posterolateral sulcus and the posterolateral sulcus and the posteromedian sulcus, we have a shallow groove there, and that groove is called the posteromedian sulcus. The groove is called the posteromedian. This one in the middle is called the posteromedian sulcus. So it's found in between the posteromedial sulcus and the posterolateral sulcus. So these are the major parts, external features of the spinal cord. Now, this posteromedial sulcus, it is the one that separates the fasciculus gracilis from the fasciculus conatus. We'll talk about it later. These two, the fasciculus gracilis and the fasciculus conatus. Now, the external features of the spinal cord that you should keep in mind have the anterior median fissure. There is a deep midline groove that is found in the ventral region. That is the anterior part. And at the mouth of this fissure, we have some thickened structures called the linear splendens. Okay. Now, posteriorly at the dorsal region, we have another groove there, a shallow one called the posteromedian sulcus, and also the presence of posteromedian septum. Now, to the side of the posteromedian sulcus and septum, we have the posterolateral sulcus. Now, the posterolateral sulcus serves as the emerging point for where the dorsal roots or the spinal nerves, where they originate from. Then also at the anterior part, we have the anterolateral sulcus, where the ventral root originates from. The ventral root is motor, the dorsal root is sensory. Now, in between the posteromedian sulcus and the posterolateral sulcus, we have a groove there called the posteromedial sulcus. And this posteromedial sulcus is what separates the fasciculus gracilis. It separates the fasciculus gracilis from the fasciculus cuneatus. So this is the major features that form the external part of the spinal cord. So you have to learn this diagram to be better and easier for you to understand if you learn the diagram. So you'll be able to identify the features, anteromedial feature, identify the anterolateral sulcus, the posteromedial sulcus, the posteromedial sulcus, posteromedial sulcus, posteromedial sulcus, and the posterolateral sulcus. Now, let's talk about spinal enlargement. Spinal enlargement. Spinal enlargement, there are some specific parts of the spinal cord where we have some enlargement. The way the spinal cord is not every part of the spinal cord that is uniform in the way their diameter is. There are some parts where we have a more wider diameter than some other parts. And this point where we have a wider diameter than some other parts of spinal cord is called spinal enlargement. And we have two types. We have the cervical enlargement that is found around the C3 to T2 spinal segment, and this forms the cervicobrachial plexus. And also we have the second one called the lumbosacral enlargement. The lumbosacral enlargement is around the L1 to S3 spinal segment, and this forms the lumbosacral plexus. You can see it in this image here. The first one, the cervical enlargement around the C3 to T2 spinal segment, and the second one is the lumbosacral enlargement around the L1 to S3 spinal segment. So these are the two spinal enlargement that is found on the spinal cord. The spinal cord is almost cylindrical throughout its length. However, it presents two expansions as enlargement. The first one, the cervicothoracic and cervicobrachial plexus, formed by the C3 down to the T2 spinal segment, and the lumbosacral formed by the L1 to S3 spinal segment. Now, this enlargement appear in fetal life during the formation of the upper and the lower limb body, because of more amount of motor neurons in this segment to supply limb musculature by the plexuses of the upper and the lower limb. Remember, the plexus of now that supply the upper limb is the brachial plexus, and this brachial plexus originates majorly from this cervical enlargement, the cervicobrachial plexus, and the plexus of now that supply the lower limb is the lumbosacral plexus, and this lumbosacral plexus emerges from the lumbosacral enlargement. So these two, presence of these two enlargement is for to foster easier supply of innervations to the upper limb and the lower limb. So during the development of the upper and the lower limb board, the spinal cord presents with this enlargement that goes on to later supply the upper limb and also the lower limb. So, and these enlargements are called spinal enlargement, and there are two in number. Don't forget it. Cervicobrachial plexus, that is from the cervical enlargement, the lumbosacral plexus from the lumbosacral enlargement. The first one is from C3 to T2 spinal segment, and the second one is from L1 to S3 spinal segment. So stop here. The next video will start with the arterial supply to the spinal cord. The arterial supply to the spinal cord, we'll look at it in the next video, and some other ones so as to wrap up the spinal cord. I'll see you in the next video.